policy should Donald Trump win the election, back, of course, in 2016. Well, when asked if he could recall who wrote this initiation document for the Russia probe in July of 2016, Comey had no recollection. He also claimed to have no knowledge of the involvement of Peter Strzok. He's a lead FBI investigator who led the Clinton email probe, whose text to girlfriend Lisa Page included gems like this: "Trump's abysmal, hoping people will just dump him." Now, Comey also couldn't remember why the FBI granted immunity to Brian Pagliano. He's a State Department employee who set up Hillary Clinton's private email server. Well, Comey's got more blank spots than Christine Blasey Ford. Similarly, he couldn't remember sparking the surveillance of Trump campaign figures. Remember Carter Page. But the few details that Comey had clarity on raise important questions. He told Congress that the details of the Steele dossier were unverified when they were used by the FBI to secure surveillance warrants of Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. Now remember, that's what started this entire Russia-Trump probe. Comey also maintained that it was not necessary for the FBI to validate the sources of the dossier. With questions outstanding, Comey will be further grilled by Congress next year. Well, as the clock is running out on the Republican efforts to get answers, well, Democrat Jerry Nadler, who'll soon take over the House Judiciary gavel, has already announced his first order of business: to shut down all investigation of possible corruption at the FBI and Department of Justice, shut down their handling of the Hillary email probe, and all inquiry into the political motivations behind the Trump-Russia investigation. So once Nadler takes the reins, it's all over.
When you become chairman, are you officially going to end this investigation?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's a waste of time to start with, and there's nothing. The entire purpose of this investigation is to cast aspersion on the real investigation, which is Mueller. There's no evidence whatsoever of bias at the FBI or any of this other nonsense they're talking about.
Well, this other nonsense speaks directly to the credibility of the Mueller probe and calls it into question. Isn't Nadler in the least bit curious about the origins of the Steele dossier, and possibly that American citizens were erroneously surveilled to serve a purely political end? And what role did Memory Challenge Comey play in all this? The Department of Justice Inspector General report did question Comey's judgment about the Clinton email investigation as well as the Russia probe. And they're still investigating, by the way, that Comey leaking of his own memo to the file accident. Remember when he sent it over to his friend at the New York Times? That investigation is ongoing. But Nadler and company want to bury all those concerns and rush right to the end game. There's only one investigation Nadler means to keep alive, and that's Mueller's. The incoming chairman already believes the Southern District of New York's contention that the president instructed his lawyer to pay settlement to two women during the campaign, well, that's a felony, directing a felony. Bingo. That's grounds for impeachment.
If it's proven, are those impeachable offenses?
Well, they would be impeachable offenses. Whether they are important enough to justify an impeachment is a different question, but certainly they'd be impeachable offenses because even though they were committed before the president became president, they were committed in the service of fraudulently obtaining the office.
Translation: rejoice, deep state. In the end, we may end up where this Russia probe began. Partisans misusing the tools of justice in a brazen attempt to drive a president from office. But no matter what Nadler says, no matter how he tries to rush the public along to impeachment, questions linger, disturbing questions linger, about the political nature of this entire collusion probe. And we will get answers, whether James Comey recalls them or not. And that's the angle. Joining me now with reactions, John Solomon, opinion contributor for The Hill, Byron York, the Washington Examiner's chief political correspondent, and Andy McCarthy, former U.S. attorney, both are Fox News contributor, and also, talk about an all-star panel, former Attorney General Mike Mukasey. General Mukasey, you were chomping at the bit over there. I mean, Comey, amazing amnesia that he had. So we've heard for years he is smart as a whip. He is focused. He is a detail-oriented individual. Memos to the file, he wrote them regularly. Guy, how do you forget so much?
It's an extraordinary transcript. It's also extraordinary because at one point he's asked about the statement by what he says that the president told him about laying off Flynn, and so that was very disturbing. And he started an investigation based on that statement. And then he's asked about President Obama saying on national television that Hillary Clinton should not be charged because she didn't intend to do anything wrong. I said, although that was on national television, so somehow it doesn't matter. That was the clear import of his response, and it's mind-blowing. It really is. What he also wasn't asked about, and what he should have been asked about, I think, is the fact that President Obama's emails were found on Hillary Clinton's illegal server, so that if he charged her, he would be charging the president as well, and whether that played any role in his calculation. I'd be interested to know his answer to that.
Now, John,
he'll be back next week.
Yeah, John, it's important to what the former FBI director did remember. However, tell us about it.
Yeah, I think the most important recollection he still had after his book was that the Steele document, the Steele dossier, which is the genesis of the majority of the support in the FISA warrant, was not corroborated, was not verified when it was submitted as evidence. The FISA rules are clear. You don't submit unverified evidence to the judges. So his admission of that validates what several congressional committees have been looking at for several months, including Devin Nunes and Chuck Grassley and people like that, Mark Meadows. It's an extraordinary admission, and I think the IG now has a pretty important statement to put in his report next year when he looks at the FISA abuses.
Andy, I want to go to you because Comey has spoken out since his testimony. He gave a big Q&A at the 92nd Street Y last night here in New York, and he was asked about the question of impeachment. Let's watch.
I can't see what the end of the Mueller effort looks like. I don't know what form it will take. I don't know what they'll conclude. And so I can't say in that respect. I can tell you that all of us should use every breath we have to make sure that the lying stops on January 20th, 2021. In a way, I hope Donald Trump is not removed from office by impeachment because it would let the country off the hook.
Andy.
Well, look, I think he's become very partisan. I'm sorry to see that. I don't actually mind partisanship. I mind it when people are pretending to be objective, or at least presenting themselves as objective and just calling it down the middle. There's a lot of talk about the necessity of the American people holding Trump to account, and it seems to me that the FBI had a golden opportunity to hold Mrs. Clinton to account. They decided not to do that. And I also think, Laura, looking at this, I don't see how any objective person looking at this, even allowing that Mrs. Clinton has the constitutional presumption of innocence just like everybody else does, I don't know how anyone could look at the two sides of this equation and say that the quality of justice was the same. So if we're going to talk about accountability, I think we should talk about accountability.
Yeah, Byron, the scales of justice tipping one way. Hillary's top aides get immunity. We don't know why they were granted immunity. If anyone on this panel knows, I don't think we've been fully told why Cheryl Mills or Huma Abedin were given immunity, and why this other guy was let off the hook, Pagliano, that apparently, Comey had no memory of. He's the guy who set up the email server. Why is he given immunity? Byron, so we're going to get into the as the chief component in this FISA application. I mean, you're a federal district court judge. If you found out that the crux of an application to you for something this important as to surveil an American citizen was not verified and also funded by the political opponent, direct political opponent of the subject of the investigation, overall subject, that's amazing.
I'd be up the wall about it. And I think that their claim that somehow they told the judge by slipping a clever little footnote in about the origin of it, I don't think that really survives scrutiny. Also, it seems to me pretty unusual that although Jim Comey described that dossier as unverified, the submission that he made and signed is marked a verified submission to the FISA court. A verified, unverified submission? What's that about?
You have that entire thing dog-eared. By the way, Judge and I were laughing before the show started, like, this is like going back to the old legal days, Judge, on the federal district court in New York. He has it all dog-eared, McCarthy. It's like, this is taking us all back. But just you read it. Now, what really jumped out at you the most from Comey on Friday?
A couple of things. First of all, his constant inability to define the questions and to understand the questions when the Republicans were asking them, and his expansive orations when the Democrats asked him questions, or his succinct yes, no, I do, I don't answers to their rhetorical questions. Those were just fine. But when the Republicans were asking questions, he was backing and filling and hemming and hawing. It was really quite noticeable. And I was also struck, as I said before, by that exchange about him claiming that the president was telling him to lay off Flynn and that he had to start an investigation of that. But when Barack Obama went on national television and said he didn't think Hillary Clinton had done anything wrong or had intended to hurt the country, which, by the way, was not the standard under the statute, but it was a broad hint that she shouldn't be charged, he was moderately upset about that, but didn't see any reason to.
Yeah, that wasn't said to influence an perhaps ongoing or forthcoming investigation. Andy McCarthy, I want to go to you. The big takeaway from the sentencing documents from the Southern District was that language about directing the payments, correct? So directing payments to these two women, $150,000, $130,000. Michael Cohen used the LLC, ends up paying the American Media Inc., National Enquirer, and then paying Stormy Daniels directly. That has led all the other cables to conclude, aha, we finally got the Roadrunner, Trump, the wily guy. They got Roadrunner, and he's guilty of a felony, and he's on the fast track to impeachment. It is amazing that without any reference to the precedent or to the underlying facts, these sweeping conclusions are made by people who, frankly, should know better on national television.
Yeah, well, I think they think, Laura, or they want you to think that because Cohen went into court and pled guilty to these two counts of campaign finance fraud, that settles the matter, and that means that that's done, that's settled. We don't have to talk about that anymore. In fact, it's very questionable whether these two transactions are campaign finance violations. Even if we assume that they are, that has often, even in much more serious cases than this, been handled as an administrative matter. But I think there's very significant question about whether these kinds of payments or obligations are, in fact, in-kind campaign contributions. And the other thing I'd say, Laura, that people ought to think about is there's a sense here where they get Trump coming or going, right? So they say that these were campaign expenditures and he should have disclosed them. If they're campaign expenditures, he could have settled them with campaign funds. But I'm wondering what the Democrats would have said if Trump had taken campaign money and done these payments. I assume that what they would have said was that he was diverting campaign funds to personal use.
But it would have been legal, though.
It just seems to me that,
FEC, yeah, it would have been legal, though. I don't think it would have been any problem under the FEC rules on that. If it was disclosed and there were a nuisance, he considered it a nuisance suit, or that's what he said today, by the way, when he was it today? I think he was out on the lawn. He basically, this is a private matter. This was not done, essentially, implication being to influence the election. I want to play something for you, Byron. This was from Rand Paul on the which I'm so glad he said this, the underlying constitutionality of these campaign finance regulations. I couldn't agree with him more. Let's watch.
I personally think that if someone makes an error in filing paperwork or in not categorizing a campaign contribution correctly, it shouldn't be jail time. It ought to be a fine. And so it's just like a lot of other things that we've done in Washington. We've over-criminalized campaign finance.
A good friend of mine today, Byron, was saying, why are conservatives accepting these as constitutional matters? They're not constitutional matters. I think you make a good case on that, but maybe we'll see that later on from the Trump folks.
Well, a lot of conservatives have argued, Mitch McConnell did a big lawsuit about it, that these limits on political donations are in fact limits on free speech and violate our First Amendment rights. They lost on that, so these limits are there. But we saw a really big shift, a sudden shift in the discussion about Trump in the last few days, which is for 2 years it was Russia, Russia, Russia. And now it is campaign finance violations. And what's clear is Democrats believe they already have enough to impeach the president, because they can say now, truthfully, federal prosecutors in New York implicated the president in 2 felonies. They've said it over and over. You're going to hear it millions of times in the future. That's what these prosecutors have done in New York by including this part in the Michael Cohen sentencing memo.
Judge, you think it's that simple?
I don't really, because although the Cohen's admissions are binding on him, they're certainly not binding on the president. And the statute, I believe, says that the purpose of the contribution has to be to influence the election. Not a purpose, the purpose. So that, for example, if he was interested in saving his reputation, saving his marriage, in addition to whatever influence it might have on the campaign, that's the end of it. John Edwards beat the same charge back in 2012, based on the same kind of reasoning. And I don't see that it's really that much of a danger to the president. Yes, he might be charged, but I don't see it as a viable case.
Fantastic panel, guys. Thank you so much. And coming up, the left is collecting another social media pelt. Well, USA Today smearing Heisman winner Kyler Murray just hours after he won the big award. His sin? Insensitive tweets he sent when he was an adolescent. Michelle Malkin, Glenn Greenwald react next.
All right, joining us now for a rare exclusive one-on-one interview, senior advisor to the president. That would be Jared Kushner. Jared, good to see you. I know you hate doing these interviews. I don't blame you. Who would ever want to come on and do this?
No, it's great to be with you, Sean.
All right, a lot going on at the White House. Let's start with the news a little bit. We got a new AG coming in. We're awaiting an announcement for chief of staff. Obviously, 2 years of the Mueller probe hanging over everybody's head. Still no evidence of any collusion, but seems like the pressure is ratcheting up. What is it like inside the White House? What can you tell us about these changes?
Well, first of all, I want to start by thanking General Kelly for his great service to this administration. General Kelly has served this country for over 40 years. And over the last 2 years in particular, he's been very helpful to the president towards implementing a lot of the most important parts of his successful agenda. So I want to start with that. I think the president right now is going to, we just brought in a new White House counsel today who just started, who's going to be fabulous. The president announced his pick for Attorney General, who will be quite good as well from what I'm seeing. And right now in the White House, we have a lot of good people who are just working along, and the president will make the right choice for chief of staff when he's ready. And hopefully he'll choose somebody he's got great chemistry with, great relationship with, who will help him navigate the next couple of years through all of the good opportunities that emerge to keep pushing forward.
I'm 30 years in radio, 23 years now at the Fox News Channel. For example, news came out today. Nobody in the news is ever going to talk about that the U.S. is now an oil exporting nation for the first time in 70 years. Add that to all the other economic success and foreign policy success, you don't hear about it. You're inside that White House. If you turn on the TV, you know what you're going to hear every second, minute, hour of every day. How does that impact you and the rest of the White House?
I think that there's a large part of the White House that it really doesn't impact that much. You know, we know what the president wants to accomplish. He's very clear with what his objectives are, and our job is to come into work every day, focus on those goals, how do we achieve them, and keep moving along. I mean, nobody really saw a lot of these numbers coming in terms of the oil exports and how we were going to make America an energy-independent country. But we've accomplished that, and that's been through a lot of great work of a lot of the cabinet secretaries, but really the leadership of the president to make that happen. So, again, there's a lot of stories that get a lot of attention in the news, but we have a lot of phenomenal people in the White House and in the administration who show up to work every day, ignoring the noise that's out there and just focusing on how do we accomplish the objectives of the president, which is to make our country more prosperous, increase wages for people, create more jobs, and keep people safe.
Okay, one of the issues, you work on specific issues. I'll ask you about the Middle East. I know you've been working on those issues, but I want to get into the issue of prison reform. I think one of the greatest moments in the president's history, he commutes the sentence of a woman by the name of Alice Marie Johnson. I actually had a chance to interview her. And we have this video of her after, 20 years in jail, one drug offense. It was serious, but one. And she comes out, and I'll never forget what she said. She says, "Thank you, America. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you won't regret giving me a second chance." And there's a big prison reform bill, and I know you're spearheading it in terms of the White House. I know there's been reluctance and resistance, especially Mitch McConnell in the Senate and others. My question to you is, why is that? What do we need to do when you have a 77% recidivism rate? And are we locking people up but not equipping them to meet the challenges when they finally get out? What do you see as the biggest problem?
Right. So this bill will accomplish a lot to make our communities safer. The recidivism rate that we have is way too high, and not doing anything about that is irresponsible, and we're allowing people to go back to our communities who we can help. And there's a lot of programs based in red states that we've really modeled this off of, so we know that this works, and we've been able to build a very strong bipartisan coalition under the president's leadership to come up with a bill that we think can really solve a lot of those problems. And what it is going into the prisons and giving job training, vocational training, mentorship, mental health treatment, drug addiction treatment to people who are coming out who are nonviolent offenders, and figuring out how, when they leave prison, they have a better chance of getting a job and re-entering society in a productive manner than going back to a life of crime. These reforms are based on what's worked, and it'll make a big difference. And so the president's built an amazing bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans, and we're very close right now, and hopefully this will get to the floor and we'll be able to have a big bipartisan celebration before Christmas.
Violent offenders, those are people that I think you cannot let out. Those are people that have got to serve their term. But on the other hand, I do think that there has been disproportionate sentencing, especially on, for example, the crack versus powder cocaine issue. I think that's been proven over and over again. I would love to see the president, and I don't know if this is part of the package, transform the power of the pardon. Put up committees, find those people that we really believe have a very low chance of recidivism, one-time offenders like Alice Marie Johnson, and find them all and give them another chance with certain conditions, perhaps.
Right. Well, this bill does do part of that, which is what it does is it ranks all the different inmates who are in our federal prison system on their likelihood of committing a crime in the future, and then allows us to put the focus on the nonviolent people who have a low risk. Like somebody like Alice Marie Johnson, that case was a grave misjustice, and the president did a great job towards righting that wrong. That case really touched his heart, and that was something where he realized that there was no reason for taxpayers to be paying to house somebody like Alice when she could be out in society, being a good role model for others, and taking the mistakes that she made and figuring out how to show other people not to make those same mistakes. Look, we have a great criminal justice system in this country. It's the best in the world, but it's still far from perfect, and this bill will do a lot to correct some racial disparities that we have in our system.
Can we save money? Can we save the taxpayers' money in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're putting too much money towards warehousing people who we don't need to be warehousing. That money instead should be going to law enforcement on the front lines to keep our communities safe. And if we do this right, as we've seen in a lot of these Republican states, we've been able to reduce crime and also reduce cost, which is why this is something that's good. And again, this is a policy that we've been able to bring a lot of very smart people together. We've got a great coalition. And the reason we've been able to do that is because it's a data-driven model, and it's based on things that work and have worked before.
Last question. Another area I know that you've been interested in is the Middle East. You've been on a number of trips. You've been to Jordan, Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia. You have talked to all these people. It seems like there's a moment where there is a new alliance or coalition emerging against Iranian hegemony and a potentially nuclear-armed Iran. Has that process been hurt as a result of the Khashoggi killing? What is the status? I know 17 individuals are being held responsible. And do you feel that we will get to the bottom of it if we haven't already?
I think our intelligence agencies are making their assessments, and we're hoping to make sure that there's justice brought where that should be. We're focused now on the broader region, which is which is figuring out how to hopefully bring a deal together between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That conflict has gone on for way too long. The president's been very focused on trying to bring all the different parties together, and we're hopeful in the next couple of months we'll put out our plan, which, again, not every side is going to love, but there's enough in it and enough reasons why people should take it and move forward. And this plan will keep the Israeli people safe, give them a good future, but also give a real opportunity and hope for the Palestinian people so that they can live much better lives. I've been saying a lot that you shouldn't be hijacking your children's future because of your grandparents' conflict. And this is a conflict that's been going on for way too long, and the way that people are living in Gaza and in the West Bank right now is not acceptable, and there's a lot we can be doing to improve their quality of life, but it comes with resolving some of these core issues. And it's not just the Israelis that want it, it's not just the Palestinian people who want it, it's all the people I speak to throughout the entire Middle East who'd like to see this issue resolved so that they can start focusing on a brighter future.
All right, Jared Kushner, thanks for being with us. Appreciate your time. When we come back, disgraced FBI Director James Comey set to face lawmakers again next week. Catherine Herridge has a full report. Also, Newt Gingrich weighs in. And later, an unbelievable story about a professor and what that professor said about the Immaculate Conception and the Virgin Mary. Yeah, you can predict how bad it is.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Trace Gallagher. People across the South are trying to recover from a deadly storm that hit their region over the weekend. Tonight, at least 3 deaths are being blamed on the storm that blanketed 5 states with snow and freezing rain. Hundreds of thousands of homes remain without power. Icy roads also triggered hundreds of accidents. And while the storm has now passed, people are being advised to stay home because of roadways that remain treacherous. President Emmanuel Macron admits he's partially responsible for the anger that has fueled weeks of protests in France. In a televised address to the nation today, Macron said he may have given the impression he doesn't care about ordinary citizens and might have hurt people with his comments. Macron previously told an unemployed man he could find a job if he, quote, crosses the streets. When news breaks out, we'll break in. I'm Trace Gallagher. Now back to Hannity.
All right, joining us now with the latest breakdown of the Comey testimony, plus what we can expect when he returns to the Hill in 1 week for his second round of questioning, Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent, our own Catherine Herridge. Catherine.
Sean, this 235-page transcript shows the FBI put 4 Americans connected to candidate Trump under investigation at the height of the presidential campaign. 10 months into that investigation, with intelligence from a surveillance warrant, 2 senior FBI officials, former lawyer Lisa Page and now Director Comey, testified collusion was unproven when special counsel Robert Mueller was appointed in May 2017. Comey said of the FBI Russia investigations, quote, "We opened them in late July. Didn't know whether we had anything. In fact, when I was fired as director, I still didn't know whether there was anything to it." Republicans castigated Comey for failing to answer their questions 245 times because he claimed not to know or could not remember key details, including this surveillance warrant application for Trump campaign aide Carter Page. It says verified application, which means the information is vetted. But Comey testified the FBI was still working to substantiate the DNC Clinton campaign-funded dossier before and after the application.
To me, it's hard to believe that Jim Comey would have forgotten all of those different details. I mean, on the Intelligence Committee, Jim Comey testified before us any number of times. I never recall him not being able to answer a question.
Committee Democrats said the hearing was designed to damage the special counsel, not search for answers. Comey is scheduled to come back a week today and will likely face questions about leaking memos documenting his conversations with the president, Sean.
All right, Catherine Herridge in Washington, thank you. Joining us now with reaction, author of the bestseller, Trump's America, The Truth About Our Nation's Great Comeback, Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is with us. So he's not answering any questions. He literally says something that should be remarkable to everybody, that what the Nunes and Grassley-Graham memo said, the bulk of information for the FISA applications to spy on a Trump campaign associate, they never told the judges Hillary paid for it. So just a, well, maybe political in nature asterisk. They never verified it. And then if you listen to everything else that he says, how do you get a FISA warrant by committing a fraud like that on the court?
Well, by the way, without any consequence. I mean, the very people who lied to the court, they're not facing any consequence. You know, if Comey had been a witness being interviewed by Mueller and he'd had 245 I can't remembers, I suspect they would keep him in there for 1,000 hours until he finally remembered. This is nonsense. Any person with a reasonable sense of judgment knows that they were breaking the law for the purpose of trying to defeat Donald Trump. And then when the Trump won anyway, they went on breaking the law, including illegally leaking things. And this isn't, it's hard, as a historian, it's hard to explain how unique it is to have the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation this deeply engaged, this dishonest, this patently fraudulent. I mean, nobody believes he didn't know 245 times. And I think that it is a really sad commentary on how sick the system has gotten.
The Russians were invited to interfere in our election with what we now know to be fake information that Hillary and the DNC she was running paid for the dossier that even the dossier's author doesn't recognize as truth. He said, well, maybe when pushed under oath. And then Comey goes, he admits the dossier is unverified. They literally did this 4 times. They signed their name to this. And nobody had bothered to look to find out that it was nonsense. And when you look at when this Russia investigation into Trump begins, in July of 2016, by May, both Lisa Page and James Comey said there was still no evidence. Then they appointed Mueller, I guess, to find it, because they couldn't find it.
Look, I mean, let's be very clear here. If we had any sense of equal justice, everything Comey's done would, in fact, from the standpoint of Mueller, would have Comey right now lined up for a whole series of felony charges. These things, you're right. He's signing documents which it is illegal to sign, knowing that they're false. And now he's telling us he didn't know the things he said in the document. Well, in any reasonable system, Comey would now be guilty, I think, by his own admission, of a series of felonies, including what they're going to ask about next week, which is having leaked things, which is illegal. But it tells you what a one-sided political witch hunt Mueller's engaged in, that all of these things go on, and somehow it never quite becomes important. But going after General Flynn after his 35 years of risking his life for America, that's okay, even though nothing Flynn has been accused of is comparable to what Comey now has admitted.
What Comey's admitted, what Clinton has done, the Russian dossier, the Uranium One deal. I mean, I begin to worry here. And then you see a media in total meltdown, freak-out mode, screaming every second, minute, and hour of the day impeachment. Because they couldn't get what they wanted of Russia. Now they're actually suggesting it's a campaign finance violation. And they want to believe Michael Cohen's news story about the deal that he put together that he said the president didn't know about, and he paid it out of his own money. But now they'll take the second version and go with that as gospel truth.
Well, as I said on your radio show today, and my newsletter on Wednesday will be all about this, I believe we should challenge Mueller to release all 70 hours of his interviews with Cohen. We ought to find out how often did they blackmail him? How often did they threaten him? How many different stories did he tell? Why did they only believe the one that suits their purpose? Because my guess is you'll find in those 70 hours that he told 5 or 6 or 7 different stories.
All right, Mr. Speaker, thank you. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a hell of a year coming up, I'll tell you that. And it will mostly be fun, and they will overreach, as I said earlier. All right, coming up, you won't believe what one professor is accusing God of being. It will disgust you, but it's something we better deal with now. Psychology professor at Minnesota State University, Mankato, accused God of being a sexual predator for impregnating the Virgin Mary, quote, without her consent. The associate professor, Eric Sprenkel, made the argument on Twitter. We did reach out to the university for comment. They told us, quote, Minnesota State University, Mankato denounces all messages that demean religious beliefs of any kind. However, as a public institution of higher education, we respect the rights and privileges associated with the U.S. Constitution, including In this case, the First Amendment right of freedom of speech and religion. Dr. Sprinkle tweeted from a personal account, while we find his message ridiculous, outrageous, and offensive, he has every legal right to voice his opinion. Also tonight, an update on a story we told you about last week. Remember the self-proclaimed Grinch principal, Elkhorn, Nebraska, banning candy canes because they were shaped like the letter J for Jesus? Well, he's been put on leave. Joining us now, former governor and Fox News contributor Mike Huckabee, and Catalina magazine publisher Kathy Aru is back with us. Kathy, it's very interesting that you get reactions depending on somebody's individual faith. There are some times that if anybody says anything negative about some religions, that's politically incorrect. But it seems that one group that it is acceptable to bash their deeply held religious beliefs, it seems to be on a more regular basis Christian and Christians. Why? Why is that?
Perhaps they're the most popular religion. Maybe it's because more people know more about Christmas than they do about Kwanzaa than they do about Hanukkah. So it's easier to pick on the religion that most people know about, the holiday that most people know about.
What is your reaction to what this person said about the Virgin Mary and sexual assault by God?
It was so extreme, but take anything out of context. The story itself, if you were just to explain the story about this virgin and spirit and, you know, what the story is, then you would think, wow, that's wild. But then if you put it back into its context, it's from the Bible, then it's religion and it makes perfect sense. But when you take something out of context like that, if you pull Jesus out of context, you can make anything up. And people love to do that. They love to say, if Jesus were alive now, what would he do? Where would he shop? What would he eat? So this guy was just really extreme. The professor went way out there.
Governor, I'm not a part of a group that says fire him. I guess people in school have a right to sign up for somebody's class or not sign up for somebody's class. It's up to them. But we're seeing a lot of this. You know, we have a nativity scene and the baby Jesus is in bars. Candy canes are banned because J equals Jesus. I never really saw candy cane as a J before, but apparently that happens. And then you have first graders being told Santa doesn't exist and reindeer don't exist, contradicting the values of parents. This happens every year. Why?
You know, Sean, I think, first of all, that the professor probably got run over by a church bus when he was a little kid and he's never gotten over it. I mean, I cannot imagine how somebody can come to the conclusion, even having a cursory reading of the gospel story. But the one thing I will compliment him for, it appears that he does believe in the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. So that's a plus. He just doesn't believe that it happened as the scripture teaches it. Now, this principle in Nebraska, that's one for the books. The shepherd's staff candy cane might remind somebody of Jesus. Well, I got news for her, and I know this is going to shock her, but Christmas is all about the worship of Christ. Christ Mass. That's what it's about. So I hope she doesn't get any presents, maybe a lump of coal in her stocking, because anything else, and it would be unfair to her, and it might insult her sensitivities. We're living in an absurd age. I grew up in a time where not everybody believed in Jesus, but we accepted that it was a part of our culture. You didn't have to embrace the